Hi, this is Dr. Brett Pearce, and I'm a practicing child psychologist, and I'm here to rantucate, I guess is a lot of what I do, on various topics associated with child mental health and once in a while personal development and kind of adult mental health as well. And I once in a blue moon do comment on pop cultural issues if I feel like it really is important enough, though I try to stay clear. At any rate, today's video is on the subject of sleep training for babies and toddlers. This is one subject that is brought up a lot over the last about year and a half. I've had the distinct honor and privilege of having a couple of friends and family members have their first kids, and I was honored to be named the godfather to a friend's daughter. And so I've been receiving a lot of questions from people close to me about the subject of sleep training. Apparently out there somehow in the course of the last, about 100, maybe 200 years, there became this idea that you have to make a point of sort of forcing babies and toddlers to cry it out when they're upset or they're hungry or they're tired or they're lonely or whatever. And that included in the context of sleep. And it's mind-boggling to me how any of these kinds of memes about unnecessary and almost intentional suffering being foisted upon kids or people, really, that has no real purpose other than just trying to avoid spoiling, especially when we're talking about a baby or a toddler. So the bottom line is, and I'll try to provide some citations, but there's just an overwhelming amount of literature out there in terms of formal research that indicates that letting babies cry it out is a terrible idea. Now, what exactly do we mean by letting babies cry it out? Well, by that we mean making a point of not comforting a baby or a toddler in a timely, reasonable fashion when the kid is upset for virtually any reason. And in the context of sleep training, it more or less means, well, put the baby alone in a room or in a crib, and if the baby's too upset and not ready to sleep and is crying a lot, you have to just let them cry it out. It's amazing to me the levels of independence and even using that word when you're talking about a baby or a toddler is just almost cartoonishly silly, folks. Independent. I mean, you're talking about an infant or toddler human being who isn't going to legally be expected to be independent for, 18 years after they grow a ton and have radical maturation of their brain and all this other stuff. I mean, it's just outrageous. Who in the world actually thinks a baby should be independent or needs to learn how to manage their own feelings? It's just nuts. But in terms of the formal evidence we know from decades and decades of pretty decent research that babies who are comforted in enough and in a timely fashion, meaning we don't sit there for a long time while they cry, and we also don't just come up and pat them on the head real quick. Babies need to be held and comforted and responded to in a quick and timely fashion. We know that these babies tend to cry less, they tend to be happier, they tend to have better outcomes in terms of their behavioral issues later in life. It is the opposite of what a lot of these weird spare the rod, spoil the child cultural memes that were developed. It is the opposite of what those memes try to tell us. And I think that on more of a kind of a common sense level or whatever it is I'm trying to say, I think people need to learn to mistrust memes that basically say, let's just have us all just kind of suffer for its own sake. Let's just train kids to suffer for its own sake. On the other hand, I completely agree that having a good attitude that, hey, we want to master frustration and pain and stress. We want to develop self-awareness and self-control and discipline. But a lot of people's ideas about discipline are this weird, almost like judicial form of it. Like you just have to kind of trudge through and endure these horrible things that are being done to you by authority figures that you're supposed to otherwise be able to trust. But I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. The bottom line is, when it comes to sleep training, parents, you don't need to resist your instincts that tell you to comfort and be close to your child. I mean, obviously there's going to come a point where there's going to be a little bit of maybe some gentle encouragement or nudging of a child when it comes to sleep. But in general, what I've done in my clinical practice when this has come up, and I've dealt with this issue a lot, and by a lot, I mean, I don't know, hundreds of times, literally, is even with older kids. If I've got an older kid who's struggling with sleep and seems to have a lot of sleep time anxiety, what I will personally do is encourage parents, and this isn't just something I just kind of came up with on my own. This is a thing you'll find a lot in mental health practice, but I said to parents, hey, why don't you just have Sarah sleep in a cot on the floor, or you could go into Sarah's room and hang out with her and sit next to her bed and read her a book and just be there until Sarah falls asleep. And then you want to hang out in the room for a little while longer until Sarah is fast asleep for, maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then try to quietly leave the room. And what I have found time and time again with that recommendation is that it helps immensely with kids who have sleep issues. And what very often happens is that kids kind of spontaneously start to then say, you know what, mom and dad, or, parents, I'm a big kid now, and I don't need you to come hang out with me. I'm going to go fall asleep on my own. And that the reason that it works that way is because of what's called the paradox of safety. And in fact, the reason that research consistently shows that babies who are comforted in a thorough and timely fashion and consistently, the reason that they are better behaved and have better emotional regulation and better, I guess I already said better behaved. The reason that happens is because of what's called the paradox of safety. More simply put, when we feel safe and happy and we feel like we have reliable support, particularly when we're, it's true in general, but especially, I would imagine, if we're little and just have the sense that the world has some dangerous stuff in it and that we need to be close to and get a lot of support with our parents. In other words, normal attachment instincts in mammals. When we have that in place, we tend to be better behaved. We tend to be more independent. We tend to excuse me. My cat's hanging out with me, and I do have a slight cat allergy. So, as I was saying, when we feel that we can trust and we feel that we are safe, we tend to be more independent. I promise you, one great way to make, to shut down people's creativity, to make it so that they don't feel as independent and don't feel as free to kind of act and explore and to regard the world in a way that shows a lot of kind of openness and trust and things in the world, is to foist a lot of negative experiences on them, especially when it feels like it's just for no good reason. Reason and intention really matters here a lot. Here's an example. If I had if I had a really close friend and that friend one day didn't show up to a hangout, like an agreed upon meeting time, come to find out that friend was in a car accident and was knocked unconscious and everything, and that's why they didn't show up, that would be extraordinarily different in terms of my levels of kind of feeling safe and okay and trusting in the circumstances. than if the friend called me up the next day and said, meh, I just decided I didn't particularly care about your feelings. I didn't really care about my agreement to come hang out with you. I just didn't really care. And, frankly, I was actually kind of mad at you. So I wanted you to feel upset and hurt. Intentions and whether or not something seems to make sense really matters for how it affects people. And so when we just have a kid cry it out, I mean, there's a level of intentionality there that is really strange as far as I'm concerned. So bottom line is, parents, you don't have to let your kid cry it out. You should not let your kid cry it out, especially when we're talking about infants and toddlers. Sure, it can get a little bit more complicated when you're talking about especially an older kid and misbehaviors that are tied with a lot of negative feelings, and the kid has a lot of big outbursts and things. It does get a little bit more complicated, but we still, in those circumstances, really want to help kids regulate their feelings. But certainly when we're talking about infants and toddlers, we do not need to worry about infants and toddlers learning bad habits because we're providing them with a tremendous amount of comfort and support. And frankly, this is almost an exact comparison, an exact analogy to an infant's physical needs. If anyone started to tell you that your infant needed to change themselves and feed themselves, that would be outrageous to the point of not only laughable, but horrific. I mean, it would be criminal. It would be obviously neglectful, but just not even remotely in the realms of what's actually possible. Infants cannot feed themselves. They cannot change themselves. They cannot protect themselves. They can't do anything like that for themselves for a second. So why is it that emotionally we would have this expectation for infants to have this kind of like emotional self-regulation and ability to kind of comfort and care for their own feelings? Or even if that's not our expectation, why would we be concerned about meeting them where they're at developmentally in terms of caring for them and comforting them and not expecting them to do that on their own? Why would we be concerned that meeting that need is going to spoil them, whereas meeting their needs physically, no one bats an eye at that? So at any rate, these are just some thoughts on the subject. Please don't let babies and toddlers cry anything out. It is always legitimate to comfort your child. And this includes if you've got a toddler who's misbehaving, because I promise you very often most of the misbehaviors are driven by difficulty regulating negative feelings anyway. You can comfort a kid and help them regulate their feelings through a lot of physical comfort and support and things like that, empathy and validation, without giving in to a limit. And so, hey, maybe more on that later in another video. At any rate, this is Dr. Brett Pearce, child psychologist, signing out. Stay tuned for more. Bye.